I sat in estate attorney Maxwell Thornton's mahogany-lined office, expecting to inherit my deceased parents' substantial assets after their sudden car accident 3 weeks prior. The lawyer solemnly read the will aloud, everything the family home worth $400,000. The investment portfolio and all bank accounts goes to my cousin Bradley, who was adopted into the family 15 years ago. I felt the blood drain from my face as I realized I'd been completely written out of my own parents' will without explanation. The fluorescent lights in Maxwell Thornton's office seemed to flicker as his words echoed in my mind. $400,000. Gone. The investment accounts my father Robert had built over 25 years of running his construction company. Vanished. Even the modest savings account where my mother Susan kept her book club money and holiday funds. All of it now belonged to Bradley. I stumbled toward the glass doors of the downtown Portland law firm, my work boots feeling heavy against the polished marble floor. The rain outside matched my internal storm as I fumbled for my truck keys in the parking garage. 28 years old, and I felt like a lost child who just discovered he was adopted. My hands shook as I drove through the familiar streets to my cramped studio apartment on the east side. The place I'd been renting for 3 years while saving money to buy my own house seemed smaller and more depressing than usual. The Murphy bed folded against the wall, the tiny kitchenette with its single burner, the bathroom barely big enough to turn around in. This was my reality now. No family safety net. No inheritance to help me build something better. I collapsed onto my secondhand couch and called Amanda my girlfriend of 2 years. She worked as a nurse at Providence Portland Medical Center, pulling 12-hour shifts in the emergency department. Her voice was tired when she answered. "Jonathan, how did it go with the lawyer?" The words caught in my throat. "They left me nothing, Amanda. Everything went to Bradley." Silence stretched between us before she spoke again. "That can't be right. Your parents loved you. They were so proud when you finished your automotive certification." "Apparently not proud enough," I said, hearing the bitterness creep into my voice. "Bradley gets the house, the money, everything." I got a handshake and directions to the exit. Amanda's shift ended at 7 that evening, and she drove straight to my apartment with Chinese takeout from our usual place on Hawthorne. She found me sitting on the floor surrounded by photo albums I'd pulled from storage. Pictures of family barbecues, Christmas mornings, fishing trips with my dad. In every recent photo, I could see it now, the distance in my parents' eyes when they looked at me. "When did they start treating you differently?" Amanda asked, settling beside me with containers of lo mein and orange chicken. I thought back over the past year. Maybe 8 months ago, Dad stopped asking me to help with weekend projects around the house. Mom quit inviting me for Sunday dinners. I figured they were just getting older, wanted more privacy. And Bradley? He was always there. Every family gathering, every holiday. They treated him like the golden child ever since his parents died in that house fire when he was 16. I picked at the orange chicken, my appetite gone. I was the one who convinced them to take him in. I thought we were giving him a fresh start. Amanda pulled a photo from the album last Thanksgiving taken just 4 months ago. Bradley sat between my parents at the dining table, all of them smiling. I stood behind them, my hand on my father's shoulder, but something in the composition looked forced, artificial. "Did you ever suspect they were planning this?" "Never. I mean, we weren't wealthy, but Dad always said the house would be mine someday. He'd point out repairs that needed doing and say, 'You'll want to fix that when this place is yours.'" I set down the photo. I guess that changed. That night, I couldn't sleep. At 3 in the morning, I drove to my parents' house, Bradley's house now, and sat in my truck across the street. The Victorian-style home with its wraparound porch and mature oak trees looked the same as always. The swing where my mother used to read in the afternoons. The driveway where my father taught me to change oil when I was 12. The bedroom window on the second floor where I'd grown up dreaming about my future. I still had my key. My parents had never asked for it back, and Bradley hadn't changed the locks yet. I knew I shouldn't, but I needed to understand. There had to be an explanation somewhere in that house. I slipped inside through the back door, muscle memory guiding me through the dark kitchen. The house smelled like my mother's lavender candles and my father's coffee. Their presence lingered in every corner, making their betrayal feel even sharper. In my father's study, I found his desk exactly as he'd left it. Bills sorted into neat piles, tax documents filed by year, a half-finished crossword puzzle in his careful handwriting. But something felt wrong. The bottom drawer where he usually kept important papers was locked. I'd never seen it locked before. I remembered the small silver key my mother kept in her jewelry box upstairs. She'd shown it to me years ago, saying it opened Daddy's important drawer, and that I should know where it was, just in case. At the time, I'd assumed she meant in case of an emergency. Now I wondered if she'd been preparing for this moment. The jewelry box sat on her vanity untouched since her death. Her wedding ring still lay in the velvet compartment where the funeral director had placed it. Beneath her pearl earrings, I found the key. Back in the study, the key turned easily in the lock. Inside the drawer, I found a manila folder thick with documents I'd never seen before. Bank statements showing large cash withdrawals. Receipts from a place called Sunrise Manor in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Medical bills for someone named Harold Morrison, my mother's maiden name. At the bottom of the folder, written in my mother's careful script on a piece of yellow notepaper, were the words that changed everything. Jonathan can never know about the Michigan situation. Bradley understands the importance of family loyalty. I drove through the night, my truck eating up the 460 miles of interstate between Portland and Grand Rapids. The documents from my father's desk lay in a folder on the passenger seat, each page raising more questions than it answered. Who was Harold Morrison? Why were my parents sending $6,000 monthly to a memory care facility in Michigan? And what did Bradley know that I didn't? The sunrise painted the Michigan landscape in shades of gold and amber as I pulled into the parking lot of Sunrise Manor. The facility looked expensive manicured gardens, a circular driveway with a fountain, and buildings designed to look more like a luxury resort than a care home. Inside the lobby featured warm wood paneling and soft classical music. A receptionist with silver hair and kind eyes looked up from her computer. "I'm looking for information about Harold Morrison," I said. "I'm his grandson, Jonathan." Her expression brightened immediately. "Oh, wonderful, Harold will be so pleased. He asks about you frequently, though he sometimes gets confused about where you are." My heart stopped. "He asks about me." "Of course, dear. Your parents visit every 2 weeks and they always share updates about your work at the auto shop. Harold is so proud of you." She paused, her face clouding with concern. "Oh, I'm sorry. You probably don't know yet. We heard about Robert and Susan's accident from Bradley when he called last week. Such a tragedy. Harold doesn't remember yet. We thought it best to wait until family could tell him in person. Bradley had called. When and why did this woman talk about Harold like I should know him? Could I see him?" I asked. "Absolutely. He's in the garden room. Fair warning, he has good days and difficult days. Today seems to be somewhere in between." She led me through corridors lined with artwork and fresh flowers. The garden room was a sunlit space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a pond where ducks paddled between lily pads. An elderly man with my mother's blue eyes and silver hair sat in a wheelchair watching the water. "Harold, you have a visitor," the receptionist said gently. "This is Jonathan." The man turned and I saw my own jawline reflected in his weathered face. Recognition flickered in his eyes. "Jonathan, Susan's boy." His voice was thin but warm. "You look just like your mother when she was young." I knelt beside his chair, my mind reeling. This man knew me, had watched me grow up from a distance. "Yes, sir, I'm Jonathan." "Where's Susan? She usually comes with you." His brow furrowed. "Or am I thinking of Bradley, that young man who visits sometimes?" Nice boy. But he asks so many questions. What kind of questions? Harold's expression grew troubled. About the money. Always about the money. Where it comes from, how much there is, whether I understand what Robert does to get it. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. Between you and me, I don't think Robert's business is doing very well. Susan worries about it constantly. I spent 2 hours with Harold piecing together fragments of his memories. On his lucid days, he understood that my father's construction company was struggling, that the monthly payments for his care were straining the family budget, that my mother felt guilty for the burden but couldn't bear to move him to a less expensive facility. Your mother visits every other weekend, Harold said during one clear moment. She brings me pictures of you working on cars, says you're the best mechanic in Portland. His eyes grew distant again. She cries sometimes, says she's sorry about the money, but that family takes care of family. Before I left, I met with the facility director, Mrs. Patricia Henley, in her office. She was a competent woman in her 50s with graying brown hair and sharp green eyes. Harold has been with us for 3 years, she explained. Alzheimer's with vascular dementia. Your parents have been incredibly dedicated, never missing a payment, despite what I gather are difficult financial circumstances. Can you tell me about Bradley's visits? Her expression shifted slightly. That's been unusual. He started coming about 6 months ago, always alone, never with your parents. He claimed to be working on a family history project, asking Harold about his past, his finances, his understanding of how his care was funded. She pulled out a file from her desk drawer. I probably shouldn't share this, but given the recent tragedy, I think you should know. Bradley requested copies of all Harold's billing statements and payment records. He said he was helping your parents organize their finances. Did you give them to him? Eventually, yes. He was quite persistent and had documentation showing your parents' consent. She hesitated. There was something that bothered me, though. During his last visit, he was recording their conversation on his phone. When I asked about it, he said he wanted to preserve Harold's memories for the family. Mrs. Henley led me to the security office and showed me footage from 3 months ago. On the grainy monitor, I watched Bradley sitting with Harold in the garden room. Bradley held his phone openly recording as he asked Harold questions about money, about Robert's work, about whether Harold knew where his care payments came from. Your grandfather mentioned some concerning things during that conversation, Mrs. Henley said quietly. He talked about Robert borrowing money from work accounts, about Susan worrying they might get in trouble. Harold was confused and probably exaggerating, but Bradley recorded all of it. I left Michigan with a growing understanding of what had happened to my family. My parents had been secretly caring for my grandfather, depleting their savings, and possibly their business accounts, to keep him in an expensive facility. Bradley had discovered this and somehow used the information to manipulate them into changing their will. But I still didn't understand how, or why my parents had chosen to protect Bradley instead of trusting me with the truth. The drive back to Portland gave me 8 hours to plan my next move. By the time I crossed the Columbia River, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I arrived back in Portland on a gray Thursday morning, my truck loaded with copies of Harold's care records and Mrs. Henley's business card tucked safely in my wallet. The house, my parents' house, Bradley's house, now sat quiet in the morning drizzle. A new BMW sedan in the driveway caught my attention. Bradley had never owned a car that expensive when my parents were alive. I rang the doorbell instead of using my key this time. I wanted this confrontation to be direct and honest. Bradley answered wearing designer clothes I'd never seen before, expensive jeans, a cashmere sweater, Italian leather shoes. At 23, he'd always been careful about his appearance, but this was different. This was wealth. Jonathan, he didn't seem surprised to see me. Come in, I suppose we need to talk. The living room had been rearranged. My mother's antique furniture remained, but Bradley had added a new entertainment system, a leather recliner, and what looked like a very expensive sound system. The family photos on the mantle had been edited. Several pictures of me had been removed, leaving gaps in the chronological display. Nice car, I said, settling onto the sofa where I'd watched Saturday morning cartoons as a child. Thank you. I felt it was important to make some upgrades now that I'm managing the estate properly. Bradley sat across from me, his posture confident. I assume you went to Michigan. You know about Harold. I know about a lot of things, Jonathan. More than you ever did. Bradley's tone carried a smugness that made my jaw clench. Your parents were in serious trouble. Financial trouble. Legal trouble. They were stealing money from Robert's construction clients to pay for Harold's care. I kept my expression neutral. How do you know that? Bradley reached into an end table drawer and pulled out a thick folder. Because I documented everything. Bank statements showing unauthorized transfers from client escrow accounts. Forged invoices padding project costs to generate extra cash. Recorded conversations between Robert and his business partner discussing how to cover their tracks. He spread the documents across the coffee table like a prosecutor presenting evidence. Your father was embezzling Jonathan. Small amounts at first, but it escalated as Harold's care costs increased. Over 2 years, he stole nearly $50,000 from his clients. And you turned him in. I gave them a choice. Bradley's voice remained steady, but I caught a flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. Face criminal charges and lose everything, including their freedom, or make arrangements to ensure the family assets would be properly managed going forward. By you, by someone with a business education who understands financial responsibility, someone who wouldn't make the same emotional decisions that got them into trouble. Bradley gestured around the room. Look at this house, Jonathan. Look at your life. You're 28 years old, renting a studio apartment, working as a mechanic. Your parents needed someone who could handle serious money, not someone who'd blow it on truck modifications and beer. The casual cruelty of his words hit harder than I'd expected. They were taking care of family. Harold needed help. Harold needed appropriate care within their means. Instead, your parents chose to commit felonies. Bradley pulled out his phone and played an audio recording. My father's voice filled the room discussing with someone named Terry Walsh how to manipulate invoices to hide the missing money. I've been wearing a wire during family gatherings for 8 months, Bradley continued. Thanksgiving dinner, Christmas morning, Sunday dinners. Every time your parents discussed their financial situation, every time they planned another transfer, every time they worried about getting caught, I recorded it all. I felt sick. You were supposed to be family. I was family. That's why I gave them the option to make this legal. They could have chosen prison Jonathan. They could have chosen to lose the house to restitution payments and legal fees. Instead, they chose to trust someone who could manage their legacy responsibly. Bradley walked to the window overlooking the front yard. Your parents died believing they were protecting both their sons. They kept you innocent of their crimes, while ensuring I wouldn't destroy the family with legal action. They made the smart choice. What about now? Are you still working with the authorities? Bradley turned back to me with something approaching a smile. I have full immunity, Jonathan. Federal immunity in exchange for my cooperation in a larger investigation into construction industry fraud in the Pacific Northwest. The FBI is very interested in patterns of embezzlement among small contractors. He pulled out an official document with government letterhead. This agreement protects me from any prosecution related to my testimony about Robert's activities. It also makes clear that I'm an asset to their investigation, not a target. I read the document carefully, my heart sinking with each paragraph. Bradley had positioned himself as a whistleblower, not a blackmailer. In the eyes of the law, he was helping fight corruption, not enabling it. You can't touch me legally, Bradley said, and you can't contest the will. Your parents signed it voluntarily with their lawyer present after full disclosure of their financial situation. It's airtight. I stood to leave, my mind racing with possibilities. At the door, I turned back. What happens now? Now I manage the estate responsibly. I pay the taxes, maintain the property, and make sure Harold continues to receive appropriate care without criminal activity funding his expenses. Bradley's expression softened slightly. You can visit anytime, Jonathan. This is still your family home. No, I said quietly. It's not. I spent that evening in my apartment with Amanda, sharing everything I'd learned. She listened without interruption, her nursing background helping her understand the medical and legal complexities of Harold's situation. So your parents were committing crimes, she said finally. To help family, to make sure my grandfather got proper care. And Bradley discovered it and used it as leverage to steal your inheritance. But legally, with immunity, with documentation. I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache building. He played this perfectly. Amanda was quiet for a long moment. Maybe too perfectly. What do you mean? In the ER, we see a lot of domestic abuse cases. Financial abuse, emotional abuse. There's usually a pattern. She pulled out her laptop. Can you get me copies of those bank statements Bradley showed you? Why? Because something about this doesn't feel right. If Bradley's evidence is so solid, why did he need 8 months to collect it? Why record family dinners? Why not just report it immediately when he discovered the problem? I thought about the timeline. He said he started investigating 8 months ago, right around the time your parents started treating you differently. You think he was manipulating them? I think smart people don't usually incriminate themselves so thoroughly unless someone is making them feel like they have no choice. Amanda looked up from her laptop. What if Bradley didn't just discover the embezzlement? What if he helped create it? I stared at her, feeling pieces of a puzzle beginning to shift in my mind. How? I don't know yet. But I know someone who might be able to help us figure it out. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number. Carmen. It's Amanda from the hospital. I need a favor. Do you still do private investigation work? Carmen Rodriguez met us at a coffee shop in the Alberta district 3 days later. She was a compact woman in her 40s, with silver-streaked black hair and shrewd dark eyes. Amanda had worked with her when Carmen's teenage daughter had been treated for a car accident injury, and they'd stayed in touch. Amanda filled me in on the basics, Carmen said, settling into the booth across from us with a large black coffee. Estate fraud potential, blackmail, federal immunity. This is either very simple or very complicated. I handed her copies of the documents Bradley had shown me. What do you think? Carmen spread the papers across the table, her expression growing more focused as she read. After 20 minutes, she looked up. Your cousin is either the unluckiest investigator in history or the luckiest criminal. What do you mean? These bank statements are almost too perfect. Every questionable transaction is clearly documented, easy to trace, obviously problematic. She pointed to a series of withdrawals highlighted in yellow. Real embezzlement usually involves more sophisticated attempts to hide the activity. This looks like someone wanted these transactions to be discovered. Carmen pulled out her tablet and began taking notes. Tell me about Bradley's financial situation before your parents died. What did he do for income? He was a college student, business major at Portland State. My parents paid his tuition and living expenses. Did he have any other source of income, job, investments? I thought back. He worked part-time at a cell phone store in the mall, maybe 15 hours a week for minimum wage. And now he's driving a $50,000 BMW and wearing designer clothes. He said those were appropriate upgrades for managing the estate. Carmen made another note. I'm going to need you to get me more information. Recent credit reports, bank statements from the estate accounts, records of any large purchases since the inheritance. Can you do that? How he's not going to give me that information? Your parents' lawyer has to provide you with basic estate information. You're still a family member, even if you didn't inherit, request a complete accounting of all estate assets and expenditures since the date of death. Amanda leaned forward. What are you looking for? Patterns, timeline inconsistencies, evidence that Bradley may have had access to your parents' finances before they changed their will. Carmen closed her tablet. If I'm right, Bradley didn't just discover your parents' problems, he helped create them. It took 2 weeks to gather the information Carmen requested. Maxwell Thornton, the estate lawyer, was initially reluctant to share detailed financial records, but Carmen had coached me on the specific legal language to use in my request. As a family member, I had limited but legitimate rights to understand how the estate was being managed. The documents painted a disturbing picture. In the 6 months before my parents' death, the frequency of their questionable financial activities had increased dramatically. What started as occasional transfers to cover Harold's care had escalated to regular, larger withdrawals that seemed to serve no clear purpose. More troubling were the dates. Many of the transfers Bradley had highlighted in his evidence occurred on days when he would have been at the house for family dinners or weekend visits. The pattern suggested someone with intimate knowledge of my parents' schedule and access to their financial information. Carmen's real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. She'd contacted Terry Walsh, my father's business partner, who agreed to meet with us at his construction office after hours. Terry was a weathered man in his 60s who'd known my father for 15 years. They'd built a solid reputation for quality residential remodeling work, and Terry was devastated by the accusations against his partner. Robert was the most honest man I knew, Terry said, sitting behind a desk covered with blueprints and project files. When this FBI agent contacted me about the embezzlement, I couldn't believe it. What did the FBI tell you? Carmen asked. That Robert had been stealing from client escrow accounts to fund personal expenses. They had bank records, recorded conversations, documentation going back 2 years. Terry pulled out a folder. But here's what bothered me. The agent said their evidence came from a family member who'd been monitoring Robert's activities. Bradley? That's the strange part. This young man had contacted me about 6 months before Robert died, asking about our bookkeeping procedures, how we handled client payments, what safeguards we had against financial irregularities. Carmen and I exchanged glances. What did you tell him? I thought it was an innocent question, maybe for a school project about small business management. I explained our system, how we kept client funds in separate accounts, how we documented expenses where we kept our records. Terry's expression darkened. Looking back, I think I gave him a roadmap for how to manipulate our books. Did you tell the FBI about this? I tried. But the agent said Bradley was a protected witness and that his methods for gathering evidence weren't relevant to the investigation. Terry leaned back in his chair. The thing is, I've been going through our records since Robert died, and I can't find evidence of the embezzlement they claim happened. Carmen sat forward. What do you mean? The bank statements they showed me looked legitimate, but they don't match our internal records. It's like someone created a parallel set of books that made normal business transactions look suspicious. Terry pulled out a ledger. For example, this transfer they highlighted as suspicious, it was actually a legitimate reimbursement to Robert for materials he bought with his personal credit card for the Johnson kitchen renovation. But in the FBI's version, it looks like he was stealing from the Johnson's escrow account. How is that possible? Someone would need access to both our business banking and Robert's personal accounts to create that kind of false narrative. They'd need to know our clients, our payment schedules, our standard procedures. Terry looked directly at me. Someone with inside information about how we operated. Carmen spent the next hour taking detailed notes about Terry's bookkeeping system and the discrepancies he'd identified. When we left his office, she was quiet for several blocks. Carmen, Amanda finally asked, "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking Bradley is much smarter than anyone gave him credit for," Carmen said, "and much more criminal." "What's our next step?" Carmen checked her watch. We're going to follow the money. Real money, not the fictional embezzlement Bradley documented. I want to know how a college student working part-time at a cell phone store managed to manipulate federal investigators and steal a $400,000 inheritance. How long will that take? Probably another week or two. But Jonathan, I need you to promise me something. What? Don't confront Bradley again until we have everything documented. If I'm right about what he's done, he's dangerous in ways you haven't considered yet. I agreed, but privately, I was already planning my next move. Bradley had been one step ahead of everyone else in this game. It was time to change the rules. 2 weeks later, Carmen called with news that changed everything. Bradley's in financial trouble, she said without preamble. Serious trouble. I was at Davidson Auto Repair finishing an oil change on a customer's Honda Civic when her call came through. What kind of trouble? The kind that makes people desperate. Can you meet me at the coffee shop? I have information you need to see. An hour later, Carmen spread a new set of documents across our usual table. Bank statements, credit reports, and what looked like legal notices. Your cousin has been living well beyond his means since inheriting your parents' estate, she began. The BMW was purchased with cash, $38,000, 2 weeks after the will was probated. Designer clothes, expensive dinners, a luxury apartment he rented under a 6-month lease. That's not illegal if he inherited the money. No, but this is. Carmen pointed to a series of transactions highlighted in red. Bradley has been gambling, heavily. The Red Dog Casino has records of him losing over $60,000 in the past 3 months. I felt my chest tighten. $60,000? It gets worse. He's been using online investment platforms to try to recoup his losses, day trading with money he couldn't afford to lose. Carmen pulled out another document. His total losses since inheriting are close to $180,000. Amanda whistled softly. That's nearly half the inheritance. Which brings us to this. Carmen placed a mortgage document on the table. Bradley took out a home equity loan against your parents' house 2 months ago. $250,000. I stared at the document, recognizing the house's address, but not understanding the implications. Is that legal? Perfectly legal. He owns the house free and clear, so he had every right to mortgage it. Carmen's expression grew grim. The problem is what he did with the money. She showed me a timeline she'd constructed. The mortgage was approved on a Wednesday. By the following Monday, $70,000 had gone to pay Bradley's casino debts. Another $50,000 went into high-risk stock trades that failed within 2 weeks. The remaining $130,000 had been divided among various creditors and lifestyle expenses. So he's broke? Worse than broke. The first mortgage payment is due next week, and he doesn't have the money to make it. Carmen pulled out her phone and showed me a text message thread. I have a contact who works at Pacific Northwest Credit Union where Bradley got the mortgage. He used falsified employment records to qualify for the loan. What kind of falsification? He claimed to be a regional manager at a tech company called Innovate Solutions, with an annual salary of $120,000. The company exists, but they've never heard of Bradley Richardson. I felt a familiar mixture of anger and opportunity building in my chest. That's mortgage fraud. Federal mortgage fraud. The kind that carries serious prison time. Carmen gathered the documents. But here's the interesting part. Bradley has been trying to contact you for the past week. What? No, he hasn't. Amanda pulled out her phone. Actually, he has. You've been getting calls from an unknown number every day. I figured it was spam. Carmen nodded. He's probably getting desperate. The casino wants their money. The margin calls on his investments are accelerating, and the mortgage payment is due. He needs help. What kind of help could I possibly give him? The kind that involves you taking responsibility for problems you didn't create. Carmen's expression hardened. This is where con artists usually complete their scams. They create a crisis, then offer their victim a chance to fix things by taking on additional liability. As if summoned by our conversation, my phone buzzed with a call from the unknown number. I looked at Carmen, who nodded encouragingly. "Hello, Jonathan?" "Thank God, it's Bradley." His voice sounded strained, different from the confident tone he'd used during our last conversation. "I need to see you. There's a family emergency." "What kind of emergency?" "It's about Harold and Mom's final wishes. Can you come to the house tonight?" I agreed to meet him despite Carmen's obvious concern. "Be careful," she warned. "Record everything if you can." That evening, I drove to the house with my phone set to record audio. Bradley answered the door looking disheveled. His expensive clothes wrinkled his hair uncombed. The confidence had drained from his demeanor, replaced by something approaching panic. "Thank you for coming," he said, leading me into the living room. "I've been dealing with some complications related to the estate." "What kind of complications?" Bradley sat heavily in his leather recliner, rubbing his temples. "The house expenses are higher than I anticipated. Property taxes, insurance, maintenance costs, and Harold's care facility has increased their rates." I remained standing, keeping my distance. "How is that my problem?" "It's not your problem exactly, but I found something in Mom's papers that changes things." Bradley pulled out a handwritten note I'd never seen before. "She left instructions about you helping maintain the house. She wanted you to contribute to the mortgage payments." The note was written in my mother's handwriting, but something about it felt wrong. The paper looked too fresh, the ink too dark. "When did you find this?" "Last week when I was organizing her personal effects." Bradley held out the note. "She wrote that you should contribute $3,000 monthly to help with house expenses, as your final responsibility to the family." I read the note carefully, noting the phrasing that didn't match my mother's usual writing style. "This says mortgage payments. Mom and Dad owned the house, free and clear." Bradley's pause lasted a fraction of a second too long. "I had to take out a small loan for renovations and estate management costs. Nothing major." "How small?" $250,000. Bradley's voice dropped almost to a whisper. "The first payment is due Monday." I felt a surge of satisfaction mixed with anger. Everything Carmen had discovered was true, and now Bradley was trying to drag me into his financial disaster. "That sounds like your problem, Bradley." "Jonathan, please. This is family. Mom specifically said you should help with the house. Mom specifically left me nothing in her will. She made her priorities clear." Bradley stood up, his desperation becoming more obvious. "I can't make the payment alone. If the house goes into foreclosure, we'll lose everything. Harold will have to be moved to a state facility." "You should have thought about that before you gambled away the inheritance." The words hit Bradley like a physical blow. His face went pale, and I saw the moment he realized I knew about his financial problems. "How did you—" "I know about the casino. I know about the day trading. I know about the fake job application you used to get the mortgage." I pulled out my phone to stop the recording. "What I don't know is why you thought I'd help you fix it." Bradley collapsed back into his chair, the fight going out of him completely. "Because I'm desperate, Jonathan. Because I made mistakes, and I don't know how to fix them." "You made choices, criminal choices." I know. Bradley put his head in his hands. "But if the house gets foreclosed, the FBI will investigate the estate management. They'll discover the mortgage fraud. They'll revoke my immunity agreement." "Good." Bradley looked up at me with something approaching tears in his eyes. "I'll go to prison, Jonathan, for a long time." I walked toward the door, then turned back. "You wanted to inherit everything, Bradley, the assets and the responsibilities. This house isn't my house. This mortgage isn't my mortgage. These problems aren't my problems. Please? I hope you figure it out," I said and meant it. but you'll figure it out without my help. I left Bradley sitting in the house that had cost him everything, surrounded by the expensive possessions he'd bought with stolen inheritance money. As I drove home, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: peace. For the first time since sitting in Maxwell Thornton's office, I wasn't the victim in this story. I was just a man, driving home to the woman he loved, free from the weight of other people's choices. 3 days later, the first domino fell. I was working under the hood of a Ford F-150 at Davidson Auto Repair when Amanda called with news. "Bradley missed the mortgage payment," she said. Carmen's contact at the credit union confirmed it. Pacific Northwest started foreclosure proceedings this morning. I straightened up from the engine bay, wiping grease from my hands with a shop rag. "How long does he have?" 90 days before they can actually seize the house. But Carmen says the real problems are just beginning. She was right. By Thursday, strange cars began appearing in the driveway of my parents' house. Expensive sedans with tinted windows. Men in suits who stayed for brief, intense conversations with Bradley before driving away. The neighbors started calling Amanda with questions. They knew we'd been together for years and assumed I still had connection to the family property. Mrs. Patterson, who lived next door to my parents for 20 years, was particularly concerned. "There are people coming and going at all hours," she told Amanda during a chance encounter at the grocery store. "Yesterday, 2 men were taking pictures of the house and measuring the yard. When I asked Bradley about it, he looked terrified." Carmen filled in the details when we met on Friday evening. The casino debt wasn't just money he lost gambling. He borrowed against his future inheritance to cover initial losses, thinking he could win it back. When that didn't work, he borrowed more. "How much more?" "Best I can determine, around $100,000, at 30% annual interest." Carmen showed me documents she'd obtained through her investigative contacts. "The people visiting him aren't lawyers, Jonathan. They're collection specialists. Loan sharks. Legal loan sharks. Private lending companies that specialize in high-risk, high-interest loans to people with valuable assets." Carmen pointed to the address on one of the documents. "Red Mountain Financial. They have a reputation for aggressive collection practices." The situation escalated over the weekend. Saturday morning, I received a frantic call from Bradley. "Jonathan, you have to help me. They're going to take the house." "Who's going to take the house?" "The credit union." "No, the other people. The private lenders. They're saying I defaulted on the agreement when I missed the mortgage payment." I could hear the panic in his voice, but I felt no sympathy. "What do you want from me?" "Can you loan me $50,000 just to buy time while I figure this out?" "I don't have $50,000, Bradley. Your girlfriend is a nurse. You could get a personal loan, use your employment as collateral." I hung up the phone. Sunday evening, the local news ran a story that changed everything. Federal authorities have arrested a Portland area man in connection with mortgage fraud and estate manipulation, the anchor announced. Bradley's photo appeared on screen as the reporter continued. Bradley Richardson, 23, allegedly used falsified employment records to secure a $250,000 home equity loan. Amanda and I watched from my apartment as the story unfolded. The FBI had been investigating Bradley independently of his role as a witness in my father's case. His mortgage fraud had triggered automated reporting systems that flagged suspicious loan applications. When investigators looked deeper, they discovered the connection to his inheritance and his protected witness status in the construction industry fraud case. Richardson's immunity agreement has been revoked. The reporter continued, and federal prosecutors say they're reviewing his testimony in the related embezzlement case for potential perjury charges. My phone rang immediately. Maxwell Thornton, the estate lawyer. "Jonathan, I need you to come to my office tomorrow morning. There have been significant developments in your parents' estate." "What kind of developments?" "The kind that might change everything." Monday morning, I sat in the same chair where I'd learned about my disinheritance 4 months earlier. But this time, Maxwell Thornton's expression was apologetic, rather than somber. "I have something to show you that I should have disclosed earlier, He began pulling out a file I'd never seen. Your parents actually executed 2 wills. The first, written 18 months before their death, left everything to you. The second, signed 6 weeks before the accident, left everything to Bradley. Why didn't you tell me this before? Because I was legally required to probate the most recent will, and I believed both documents were validly executed. Maxwell opened the file. However, I've been documenting concerns about the second will since the day your parents signed it. He pulled out a thick folder of notes, photographs, and what looked like surveillance footage. Your parents came to my office 3 times to discuss the second will. During the first visit, they seemed confused and reluctant. During the second visit, Bradley accompanied them and did most of the talking. During the third visit, when they actually signed, I noticed signs of distress. What kind of signs? Your mother was crying. Your father kept looking at Bradley for approval before answering my questions. When I asked them privately if they were certain about the changes, they both said yes, but neither would make eye contact with me. Maxwell pulled out a small digital recorder. I secretly recorded portions of that final meeting, which I probably shouldn't have done, but my instincts told me something was wrong. He pressed play. My parents' voices filled the room, strained and uncertain. "We need to make sure our sons are taken care of," my mother's voice said. "Both sons," my father added. "Bradley has explained the situation to us," my mother continued. "We understand what needs to be done." Then Bradley's voice, confident and controlling. "Uncle Robert, Aunt Susan, just remember what we discussed about Jonathan's future stability. This arrangement protects everyone." Maxwell stopped the recording. After Bradley's arrest, I contacted federal prosecutors and provided this evidence. They've determined that the second will was executed under duress, making it invalid. What does that mean? It means your parents' original will is now the governing document. You inherit everything, Jonathan. The house, the remaining estate funds, everything. I sat in stunned silence as Maxwell explained the legal process for reinstating my inheritance. The house would need to be cleared of Bradley's belongings and any liens he'd placed against it. The mortgage would be resolved through the estate. Most importantly, the federal government would seize Bradley's remaining assets to cover restitution payments to all the people he'd defrauded. There is one complication, Maxwell added. The estate has been significantly depleted by Bradley's activities. The house is still valuable, but the liquid assets are largely gone. How much is left? After legal fees and settling Bradley's debts, probably around $100,000. Plus the house, which is worth approximately $400,000, even with the mortgage against it. I thought about my grandfather Harold in his memory care facility, about my parents' original intention to care for family. What happens to Harold's expenses? That's entirely up to you now. You're under no legal obligation to continue funding his care. I knew what I wanted to do, but first, I had one more conversation to finish. 6 months later, I stood in the driveway of my childhood home, watching a moving truck pull away from the curb. The house was mine again legally and morally, but it would never feel the same way it had when I was growing up. Too much had happened within these walls. Too many lies had been told in the living room where my family used to gather for holidays. Bradley was serving 18 months in federal prison for mortgage fraud, estate fraud, and perjury. His sentence was relatively light due to his cooperation with ongoing investigations into financial fraud in the construction industry, investigations that ultimately cleared my father of any serious wrongdoing. Terry Walsh had been right. Most of the evidence Bradley presented against my parents was either manipulated or completely fabricated. The truth as it finally emerged was much simpler and more human than Bradley's elaborate conspiracy. My parents had been struggling financially trying to care for Harold, while my father's construction business faced normal market pressures. They'd made a few questionable decisions, borrowing small amounts from client escrow accounts with the intention of repaying them quickly, but nothing approaching the systematic embezzlement Bradley had documented. Bradley had discovered their financial stress and gradually escalated it, offering to help with bookkeeping, while actually creating larger problems he could later expose. His plan had been sophisticated: create evidence of serious crimes, offer to protect his victims in exchange for inheritance, then disappear into a comfortable life funded by stolen family assets. The plan had worked perfectly until greed overcame patience. I sold the house 3 weeks after regaining ownership. $400,000 seemed like an enormous amount of money to someone who'd been living in a studio apartment and working as a mechanic. But I'd learned something important about wealth during the past year. Money without integrity was just paper. But integrity without money could still build a meaningful life. I used the first $50,000 to establish a permanent trust fund for Harold's care at Sunrise Manor. Mrs. Patricia Henley helped me set up an arrangement that would cover his expenses for the remainder of his life, with annual adjustments for inflation and medical needs. Harold's moments of clarity were becoming rarer, but he still recognized me during visits, and he still asked about my work with cars. Another $30,000 went to legal aid organizations that help families navigate estate fraud, a problem I'd learned was more common than most people realized. Carmen Rodriguez had introduced me to attorneys who specialized in financial elder abuse, and their stories convinced me that my family's situation, while painful, could have been much worse. The remaining money allowed me to fulfill a dream I'd harbored since finishing my automotive certification, opening my own shop. Jonathan's Honest Auto occupied a former gas station on Division Street, with 2 service bays, a small office, and a waiting area where customers could watch me work on their vehicles through large windows. Transparency in all things had become my business philosophy. Amanda quit her job at the hospital to help run the shop's administrative side, though she kept her nursing license current and picked up occasional shifts when we needed extra income. We'd married in a small ceremony at the shop with Terry Walsh as my best man and Carmen Rodriguez among our few guests. Mrs. Patterson from my parents' old neighborhood came bringing a casserole and stories about my mother's flower garden. The shop specialized in honest diagnostics and fair pricing, particularly for customers who'd been taken advantage of by less scrupulous mechanics. I'd learned firsthand how devastating financial manipulation could be, and I was determined never to be part of that kind of harm. Our customer base grew through word-of-mouth recommendations, and within 6 months we were booked 3 weeks in advance. Terry Walsh became a regular customer and informal mentor, bringing his work trucks in for service, and teaching me about the business principles he and my father had shared. Through Terry, I learned more about who my parents really were: hardworking people who'd made mistakes under pressure, but who'd never stopped trying to do right by their family. "Your father would be proud," Terry told me one afternoon as I finished rotating the tires on his Ford pickup. "He always said you had the most integrity of anyone he knew. Even when you were a teenager, you'd rather admit a mistake than cover it up." The comment stayed with me as I locked up the shop that evening. Integrity couldn't be inherited or stolen. It had to be built through daily choices, honest work, and treating other people with respect. I'd learned that lesson not from my inheritance, but from losing it and discovering who I was without family money to fall back on. On the anniversary of my parents' death, Amanda and I drove to Michigan to visit Harold. His condition had declined significantly, but he seemed content in the memory care facility's garden room, watching ducks paddle between lily pads in the pond outside his window. "Tell me about the cars," he said during one of his clearer moments. "Susan says you fix cars now." I told him about the shop, about our customers, about the satisfaction of solving mechanical problems that had frustrated other people. Harold listened with the focused attention that reminded me of my mother, asking technical questions that demonstrated his understanding even through the fog of dementia. "Your mother worried about you, you know," Harold said as our visit was ending. "She thought maybe she and Robert had made things too easy for you growing up. She wanted you to learn how to build something yourself." I realized then that my parents' greatest gift hadn't been the inheritance I'd lost and regained. It had been the values they'd taught me through their example: work hard, help family, tell the truth, even when it's difficult, and take responsibility for your choices. Bradley had manipulated my parents' love for family and used their mistakes against them, but he'd never understood the difference between having money and building wealth. Real wealth, the kind that lasted and meant something, came from creating value for other people, not from stealing what others had built. As Amanda and I drove back to Portland, I thought about the year that had changed everything. I'd lost my parents, discovered I had family I'd never known, been disinherited, learned about betrayal and manipulation, and ultimately found my way back to an inheritance that was smaller but more meaningful than what I'd originally expected. The shop was thriving. Harold was comfortable and cared for. Amanda and I were building a life together based on shared values rather than shared money. Even the relationship with my parents' memory had been restored. I could think of them now as imperfect people who'd loved me, rather than as the uncaring strangers Bradley's manipulations had made them appear to be. The most important lesson I'd learned was this: integrity cannot be inherited, but it also cannot be stolen. No amount of manipulation or legal maneuvering could take away the person my parents had raised me to be. That foundation, built through years of their example, their expectations, and their love, was the real inheritance, and it was the only one that truly mattered. Standing in my shop on Monday morning, preparing for another day of honest work, I finally understood what Harold had meant about my mother's worries. She hadn't wanted me to inherit money that would make life easy. She'd wanted me to inherit the tools to build something meaningful with my own hands and character. In the end, that's exactly what had happened, just not in the way any of us had planned. If you've ever felt betrayed by family or wondered how to rebuild after losing everything, I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us become the foundation for the best things we build. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I hope it reminds you that integrity is the one inheritance no one can ever take away from you. Please like this video if it helped you think differently about family money or overcoming betrayal. Subscribe for more real-life stories about finding strength in difficult times, and share this with anyone who might need to hear that it's possible to rebuild after loss. Until next time, remember that your character is your greatest asset, and no one can devalue that but you.